When do you get to be a child?
Yes.
You know, can you actually be an innocent child in a black body?
You do not wear a hoodie outside, period. And it's just fear of his safety.
My daughters are running around the house pretending to have super soakers. And I sat them down and I said, you cannot pretend ever to have a gun.
All right, so let's dig in. We got chicken, kale apple salad. We have these carrots, which have a little bit of a kick to them. So if you don't really like spicy, that may not be it. You like spicy?
I think everyone here.
Let me know if it's good. So I wanted to start off by at least talking about kind of how we identify racially, ethnically, because I think it's important to kind of spell out that we do have a diverse range of perspectives here at the table. There's not one monolithic Asian experience, right? So
I think society generally looks at Asians as this one umbrella, like this one monolith. And I was like, oh my gosh, look at a map of Asia. How many countries? And even within those countries, there's different ethnic groups and languages, as we were talking about. But I think the census does this disservice. It lumps all Asians together, but it does a really bad job of disaggregating the data.
Exactly.
Really.
It's half the world's population almost, right? Like,
Yeah, it is.
You know, between India and China, that's 1/3 of the world's population right there.
right.
I actually present, because of my fair skin, I present as usually Korean, Japanese, or Chinese. So a lot of folks will wonder if I'm from Singapore or from Korea. And when I tell them, actually, no, my parents are Thai, they're usually really surprised.
You know, in our culture and also with Asia, there's colorism. It happens. So the darker you are, usually it's not a good thing. I love my brown skin, but I do know growing up that my mom was saying, don't go out in the sun so long and it was really confusing for me. And so what I do now with my child, and right away I'm like, brown and black is beautiful. The darker you get, you're beautiful. And look at our beautiful skin.
One of the last times it was in Cambodia, I was on one of the islands and I got mosquito bites and I came back to like a regular urban center city and I was in a grocery store. And I was like, I need something to put on my bug bites. And then they're like, yeah, go here down this aisle. And up and down the aisle was all whitening cream. And the only thing they had to like say treat the mosquito bite was like Tiger Balm.
When did you all first start talking to your kids about identity, about race, about how they're seen in the world?
Right, so my daughter was reading about Martin Luther King and Gandhi, and she was saying, "Wow, Martin Luther King learned from Gandhi and so on." And so she's having this conversation with my wife about what the experiences were for a lot of black people over here and so on. And suddenly she says, "Whew, thank God I'm white." And my wife didn't want to correct her right then. She said, "Tell me why you feel that way," right? So she wanted to have the conversation. Why do you feel that way? And so my daughter, 5.5, says, "Well, I've never had any of that happen to me, so I must be white." Right? And so that's where my wife talked about, really, color is not the way to define people. But if we were to define that way, then you would be brown, Indian brown.
Right.
And guess what? Even in India, the same thing happened like 70 years ago when the Britishers were ruling. Brown skinned people couldn't go into some clubs, couldn't go, they were restricted, there was segregation there as well. And that's why Gandhi had to fight for that and so on.
Do you all have similar experiences or conversations?
I gave our children Chinese first names because their last name is American. So, but I wanted them to have a piece of my side of the heritage, and I picked very specific names that had stories to go with them. And so, as they were growing up and learning their name, how to say their name, how to spell their name, they would tell them the story of their names, and that roots them in their Chinese heritage. And then
what has their experience been like in school?
Sometimes they get really upset that their teachers or some of their classmates continually mispronounce their names, but I just remind them that if a teacher mispronounces their name or a friend does or makes fun of the name, that they need to stand up for themselves by saying, hey, this is how you say my name. Don't mess with it.
The name, we were also very deliberate in selecting a name that sort of represented her heritage. At the same time, we wanted it to be easy. It's easy to give a very hard name and then expect everyone else to learn it, but we didn't want to do that either. We just wanted it to be something simple for others, still it represented her heritage. So we had to go through that exercise right in the beginning.
What was the exercise?
Well, we had a bunch of names, and then I went to work, gave it to a few of my American friends and said, hey, how would you read this? How would you pronounce this? And so on. And then to make sure that it's not difficult for them, and it was pretty easy.
It's really important that people get your name right, because identity crises are big. My name is Buntai. There's a million different ways. I grew up people saying it, so I know exactly what that's like. His name's Tyler, but he has like a million different ethnic names in it. But I know that when he walks into spaces, you're good enough to react to any situation and be prepared for whatever it is to show people that, again, this is who you are, this is your truth.
The other day my son came home singing this like ching chong, like Jangling Song. I'm like, where in the world did you learn that? And it was one of his buddies who had started singing that. I said, do you realize that is very offensive? And my son didn't know, because he had not encountered that before. That was the first time.
Wow.
And now he's aware.
And how old is he?
He's 8.
So young.
And and you're like, wow, our little Seattle bubble is not even in our bubble.
You were shaking your head.
Yeah, it is. It's baffling to, on the surface level, like, I think Seattle kind of prides itself in being such a liberal bastion, and you wouldn't imagine that, these type of inequalities happen. But if you just peel it back.
So when you were talking about what happened to your son, that happened to me in the 80s growing up, and I had very much a reaction of like, it's still happening today. Wow. Of that Ching Chong song. And as a child, I knew it was wrong. I'm like, but in the way I was like, well, they're wrong. I'm not even Chinese. So, but I knew what they were saying was wrong. It made me feel bad because it made me feel different.
Yeah.
I want my daughter to have those tools that I didn't have when I was in 6th grade and was going back to class from the water fountain, and a parade of children from another class went by and someone did the Ching Chong song. And it was actually another child of color. But I was so embarrassed and humiliated because it was in front of an audience.
What has it been like for your kids moving in predominantly white spaces, if they do?
Kids, if I'm out with them, say at a store, I will tell them, keep your hands out of your pockets and don't act suspicious. And my husband doesn't have to think about these kinds of things because he's, white guy. Love him dearly, obviously. But he just doesn't have to think about these things.
I have a similar situation. If I am alone with my child, I think about too, how am I dressed? How am I going to be read when I'm walking down the street? So if I'm dressed nice now, which is professional, I'll be treated differently versus I'm wearing a baseball cap and a hoodie, and then people will think I'm much younger than I am, which is nice sometimes.
You don't raise it.
Yeah, that's right. So, but then you don't want to raisin. I think, I get worried because how we're going to be treated.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I really think about how I love how your daughter is so passionate and loud, and I love when her kids are loud because they're forced to be reckoned with. They can hear me and see me.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And that's a shift too, because in many Asian cultures, women are supposed to be demure. They're not meant to be heard. And so I wanted that not to be the case for my daughter, that's for sure. And I'm like, okay, some days you just want them to listen to you so that you can get out the door.
Right.
But when she digs in her heels and wants to speak her mind, I'm like, you do that.
Yeah.
I may be frustrated in this moment because we're on a schedule, but
Right.
you practice that.
The world's going to give them whatever. Yeah. But our role is to build their values, to build up their self-love and to give them some direction on like how they can navigate their path.
Right.
So it's hard out there. You know, we've been through it, but I think we have emerged the wiser.
Well, thank you all for coming. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Jenna.
Good, yeah.